The room that kept her voice. Erin steps through the creaking doorway of the old house, her boots scraping against the uneven floorboards that groan under each step. The air hangs thick, heavy with dust and a faint soreness, like damp walls left to rot in silence. She adjusts the strap of her duffel bag, its weight tugging at her shoulder. As she peers into the dimness ahead, faded wallpaper peels from the walls in curling strips, yellowed and stained, while a narrow staircase twists upward into shadow, its banister chipped and loose. The hallway stretches long and crooked before her, lined with closed doors, their paint cracked and peeling. Margaret, the landlady, shuffles behind, her frail frame hunched, hands trembling as she clutches a jumble of keys that clink softly. Her voice rasps thin and brittle, reciting rules about rent and quiet hours. But Erin only half listens, her eyes tracing the worn edges of her new home, cheap and solitary, a refuge from the chaos of her last place. Margaret stops at a door near the hall's end, its wood scratched and faded, fumbles with the lock until it clicks open, then gestures inside with a shaky hand. The room unfolds small and cramped, a single bed pressed against one wall, its mattress sunken beneath a patchy quilt that smells faintly of mildew. A wobbly table sits beside it, holding a lamp with a frayed cord, its shade tilted crooked. A high window perches above, its glass clouded with grime, letting in a weak smear of gray daylight that barely touches the shadowed corners. Across from the bed looms a tall wardrobe, its dark wood dull and chipped, handles rusted to a mottled brown, standing silent and heavy in the gloom. Margaret hovers at the threshold, her fingers twisting the edge of her sweater, her gaze flicking to the wardrobe before settling on Erin with a tight, uneasy stare. "Don't open that," she says, her voice dropping low, almost swallowed by the stillness. "It's hers, her things. Leave it alone." Erin tilts her head, a question forming, but Margaret's lips press thin, her eyes darting away, and she shuffles out quick, the door clicking shut behind her, leaving Erin alone with the house's creaking quiet. She drops her bag onto the bed, the springs squeaking sharp under the weight, unzips it with a slow rasp, pulling out clothes and books to stack on the table. The air feels colder than it should, a chill seeping from the walls that brushes her skin, raising faint goosebumps along her arms. She shakes it off, blames the drafty old building, focuses on unpacking, the rustle of fabric and thud of paperbacks a small anchor in the stillness. The wardrobe lingers in the corner of her vision, its bulk imposing, almost watchful, but she turns her back to it, arranges her things with deliberate care, claiming the space as her own. Night creeps in slow, the gray outside deepening to a solid black, the wind picking up outside rattling the window pane with a soft, persistent tap. She flips on the lamp, its bulb buzzing faintly, casting a warm glow that pushes back the shadows creeping from the edges. She stretches out on the bed, scrolls her phone, the hum of notifications, a thin thread of comfort against the quiet pressing in around her. Sleep tugs at her, heavy and sluggish, her eyes fluttering shut as the wind howls louder, a mournful wail weaving into her drifting thoughts. A sound slips through, soft at first, barely audible over the gusts rattling the glass. She stirs, blinks into the dark, the lamp off. Now, though she doesn't recall touching the switch, the room sits silent, save for that sound, a whisper, faint and female, curling through the air like a wisp of fog. "Where am I?" it asks, thin and trembling, a plea that lingers unanswered. Erin sits up, her heart thudding slow and heavy, her breath puffing out in small clouds in the sudden cold. The whisper drifts again, clearer, closer, seeping from the wardrobe in the corner. "Where am I?" She swings her legs off the bed, the floorboards creaking sharp under her bare feet, steps toward it, the air growing colder, sharper, with each move. The wardrobe stands still, its door shut tight, no lock in sight, just a thin crack along the edge where the wood gapes slightly. She leans close, the grain rough against her cheek, hears it once more, softer, desperate. "Erin, help me." Her name, spoken clear and deliberate, jolts through her like a current, sharp and icy. She pulls back, her breath shallow, eyes locked on the door as the whisper fades into silence. Her hands shake as she grabs her phone, the flashlight beam slicing through the dark, sweeping over the wardrobe, the bed, the walls. Nothing shifts, nothing stirs, just the room, cold and still, the wind rattling outside like restless fingers against the glass. She checks the window, finds it locked tight, the pane fogged with condensation. though the heat's off, the air dry. She turns, the beam catching the floor, and freezes. Scratches mark the wood, faint and jagged, a cluster of lines near the wardrobe, like nails dragged in a quick, frantic burst. Her stomach twists, a sour knot tightening deep inside, but she tells herself it's old damage, the house worn from years of use, nothing more. She climbs back into bed, pulls the quilt tight around her shoulders, the whisper echoing in her mind, her name on its lips, a sound she can't shake loose. Morning dawns gray and heavy, sunlight weak through the grimy window, the air thick with a damp chill. Erin wakes slow, her head foggy, the night's unease clinging like a shadow over her thoughts. She checks the floor again, the scratches still there, their edges sharp under her fingertips, unchanged but somehow more vivid in the daylight. She stands, stretches, grabs her coat, heads downstairs to find Margaret, questions buzzing loud and insistent in her skull. The landlady sits in the kitchen, a chipped mug of tea steaming in her hands, her face pale under the harsh glare of a bare bulb swinging overhead. Erin clears her throat, leans against the doorway, her voice steady but tight. Who's she? The one with the stuff in the wardrobe? Margaret's hands falter, tea sloshing slightly, her eyes darting up, wide and watery, glistening faintly. In the light, my sister, she says, her voice barely above a whisper, fragile as glass. Anna lived in that room 20 years ago, went missing one night, never found her. Her voice stayed. The words hang heavy, brittle, Margaret's fingers tightening around the mug until her knuckles whiten. Don't open it, she adds, her tone sharper, her gaze flicking to the stairs with a flicker of dread. Just don't. Erin nods, unease, curling tighter in her chest, a cold weight settling deep. But she doesn't press further, turns back upstairs, the creak of the steps loud in the stillness. The room feels smaller now, the wardrobe's shadow longer, stretching across the floor like a dark spill. She avoids looking at it, spends the day out, wandering the town's narrow streets, coffee shops and bookstores, a thin distraction from the chill lodged in her bones. Dusk falls early, the sky bruising purple, the wind picking up as she trudges back, her key scraping loud in the lock. The house greets her with silence, Margaret tucked away in her room, the hall dark save for a faint glow spilling from her door. She steps inside, finds the lamp on, buzzing steady, though she'd switched it off before leaving, the cord dangling untouched. The wardrobe stands unchanged, its door shut tight, but the air feels colder, heavier, pressing against her skin like a damp cloth. She sets her bag down, kicks off her boots, the floorboards creaking soft under her socks as she moves. Night deepens, the wind howling louder, a mournful sound that shakes the window pane with restless force. She sits on the bed, scrolls her phone, the screens light a small shield against the dark creeping in from the corners. The whisper comes. Again, sharper now, cutting through the wind's roar with a clarity that prickles her skin. Erin, help me. It seeps from the wardrobe, low and pleading, a sound that claws at her nerves and sets her pulse racing. She stands, steps closer, the air growing colder, a faint dampness brushing her face, sharp and sour like wet earth. The wardrobe trembles just slightly, a faint shudder rippling through the wood, the crack along the door glowing faintly in the lamplight, a thin sliver of shadow within. Where am I? The voice says, louder, insistent, her name woven into it like a thread. Erin, please. She grabs the handle, rusted metal biting into her palm, pulls hard, but it doesn't budge, stuck fast as if sealed by years of neglect. The whisper grows frantic, a rapid murmur spilling from the crack, overlapping, desperate. Help me, Erin, help me. She steps back, her heart pounding loud in her ears, the room tilting slightly, the air thick with that sour dampness, a stench that clings to her throat. She grabs the chair from the corner, wedges it under the handle, the wood scraping loud against the floor, a harsh sound that echoes in the quiet. The whisper fades, silence falling heavy, but the wardrobe's presence looms larger, a weight that presses against her chest, suffocating in its stillness. She climbs into bed, pulls the quilt tight, eyes fixed on the chair, its legs steady against the door, a frail barrier against the unknown. Sleep comes slow, broken by the wind's howl, the creak of the house settling around her, a restless groan that mirrors her unease. She wakes to darkness, the lamp off again, the room cold and still, the air sharp against her skin. The chair sits pushed aside, angled crooked near the bed, the wardrobe door shut, but the crack wider, a faint glow spilling from within, pulsing faintly like a breath. Her breath catches, sharp and ragged, as she fumbles for her phone, the flashlight beam sweeping the room with a jittery arc. Scratches mark the floor, deeper now, a jagged path leading from the wardrobe to her bed, stopping inches from where she lies, their edges raw and fresh. Her hands tremble, the beam catching the mirror above the table, its surface fogged, condensation beating slow despite the dry air inside. She stands, steps closer, the glass cold under her fingers, wipes it clear with a quick swipe. Her reflection stares back, pale and tired, but the fog creeps in again, slow and steady, a shape forming faint behind her own, blurred, but growing sharper with each passing second. Night after night, the whisper grows, a constant murmur weaving through the wind, spilling from the wardrobe like water through a crack, relentless and unyielding. Erin, help me, it says, sharp and pleading, her name, a refrain that burrows into her skull, echoing long after it fades. She checks the chair each morning, finds it moved, angled different, the scratches deeper, spreading across the floor like roots clawing through earth. Her things start to vanish, small at first, a hairbrush from the table gone by noon, a sock from the laundry pile missing by dusk, a pen from her bag nowhere to be found. She searches the room, under the bed, behind the table, lifting the quilt, with shaking hands, but finds nothing, the air growing colder, damper, a faint smell of rot seeping into the walls, sour and thick, like wet wood left to decay. The mirror fogs nightly, her reflection blurring, and one morning she sees it, her hairbrush, sitting neat on the bed in the glass, though the real bed stays empty, untouched. She blinks, wipes the fog with a quick swipe, checks again, finds nothing there. But the image lingers, sharp and vivid, burned into her mind like a photograph. She confronts Margaret again, finds her in the kitchen, hands trembling worse, tea cold in her mug, the steam long gone. What's happening up there? Erin asks, her voice tight, fingers digging into her palms until her nails bite skin. Margaret's eyes dart up, wide and glassy, her lips parting slow, hesitant. Anna, she says, barely audible, her voice cracking on the name. She never left. Her voice stayed, her things stayed. She's still looking, her hands shake harder, tea sloshing over the rim, splattering dark on the table. Don't open it, Erin, don't let her out. The words hang heavy, a warning laced with fear, her gaze flickering with something raw and unguarded before she turns away, shuffles off, leaving Erin with the creak of the house and a growing dread that coils tight in her chest, a cold weight that won't lift. She heads back upstairs, the room colder now, the wardrobe's shadow stretching long across the floor, the air thick with that sour rot, a stench that clings to her clothes, her skin, her every breath. The whispers sharpen, a constant drone that follows her through the day, spilling from the wardrobe, the walls, the floorboards, a sound that weaves into every corner of her life. Erin, open it, the voice says, low and urgent, her name, a plea that digs into her nerves, sharp and relentless. She wedges the chair tighter, stacks books on top, piling them high, but each morning they're scattered, the chair pushed aside, the scratches deeper, curling around her bed like fingers reaching out from the dark. Her things keep vanishing. A notebook from her bag gone by midday, a scarf from the hook missing by night, a photo of her smiling at the beach, nowhere to be found, each lost without trace, only to appear in the mirror, laid out neat on the bed's reflection, untouched in the real room. The wardrobe trembles nightly, a faint shudder rippling through the wood, the crack glowing brighter, the smell of rot thicker, clinging to her hair, her hands, her lungs. She stops sleeping, sits up with the lamp on, its buzz a frail shield against the dark, but the whispers cut through, sharp and relentless. Erin, I'm waiting. She digs deeper, desperation driving her to the basement, a cramped space beneath the house, damp and dark, the air heavy with mold and decay. She finds a box, cardboard, sagging, tucked behind rusted pipes, pulls it free with trembling hands, the dampness soaking into her fingers. Inside, letters, yellowed and brittle, Anna's handwriting scrawled across them, words of anger, fear, pleas to leave scratched in frantic loops. Newspaper clippings flutter out, faded ink detailing her disappearance, 20 years back last. Seen in this house, a fight with Margaret the night before, her trail ending cold at the door, no sign of her beyond the walls. Erin reads, her pulse pounding loud in her ears, the whispers echoing faint from above, growing sharper. You're next. She climbs back upstairs, the room colder, the wardrobe's door rattling soft, the mirror fogged, her reflection staring back, eyes hollower, lips moving faint in a silent chant. Open it. She grabs a hammer from the kitchen, swings hard, the wardrobe, cracking, wood splintering under the blow. But inside, nothing, just her missing things, wet and slimy, tangled, with dark strands that glisten faintly, a scrap of paper tucked among them, ink fresh and wet. I'm here, Erin. The whispers turn to cries, loud and raw, spilling from the wardrobe, the walls, the floor, her name, a scream that shakes the room, the air trembling with its force. She runs, grabs her bag, but the door jams, the lock stuck fast, the windows sealed tight, glass unyielding under her fists, cold and solid as stone. The mirror falls, crashes to the floor, shards scattering wide, but her reflection stays, standing tall in the broken frame, eyes empty, lips whispering slow and deliberate. You're mine. The voice blends with hers, a duet of terror that fills her skull, scratches blooming on her arms, thin and jagged, though she hasn't touched a thing, their edges stinging sharp against her skin. The wardrobe gapes open, empty, but the cold pulls, a deep, hollow chill that tugs at her skin, her bones, her breath, a force she can't fight. Morning comes, Margaret enters, finds the room silent, the bed untouched, the mirror whole reflecting nothing but the empty space, its surface fogged faintly. Scratches mark the floor, deep and wild, a scrap of paper beside them, ink wet and dark. Erin here. Epilogue. Weeks later, Mia moves in, young and strapped for cash, the room cheap and quiet, a perfect fit for her tight budget. Night falls. The wind howls outside, a whisper curling through the dark, soft at first. Where am I? Mia, help me. Two voices now, weaving together from the wardrobe's crack, low and pleading, a duet that prickles her skin. The mirror fogs, her reflection blurring, eyes hollow, lips moving faint in the glass, her hairbrush laid neat on the bed's image, though the real one stays bare untouched. The whispers grow, the scratches spread across the floor, the room remembers, waiting, patient and unyielding, for its next voice to claim.